Welcome to Salvation and Catastrophe, the Greek-Turkish War 1919-1922, also known as the Western Front of the Turkish War of Independence. And in this episode, I'm going to cover the May-June 1920 events, and we have a lot of things happening. The Grand National Assembly begins a civil war with the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. There is the beginning of the Great Greek Summer Offensive of 1920, while at the same time, up in the Caucasus, the Soviet Union is increasingly making itself more powerful and more felt. Now, I'm sorry for the lighting. My daughter is sleeping in the same room with me, so I'm keeping the lights dim. And let's get on with it. Let's begin with May. We have a lot of things to cover. On 1st May 1920, the Azerbaijani Soviet Republic, which has been recently created, and the Russian Socialist Federated Soviet Republics demand an immediate end to Armenian resistance at Karabakh. Between 1st and 9th May 1920, we have the onset of the tense situation between the Armenian Bolsheviks and the Armenian Republic at the city of Alexandropol. In Turkish, it's known as Gümrük. From 2 to 3 May 1920, the pro-Bolshevik Makharazde rising in Tiflis is defeated by the Menshevik government of Georgia. This defeat leads Lenin on May 4th to order a pause in attempts to subvert the Georgian Menshevik Republic or use the Red Army against it. On 3rd May 1920, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is voted as head of the government of the Turkish Grand National Assembly and the first government of the and at the same time was the Speaker of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. Now, this first government is called the Commissioners of the Ministerial Council. The chairman is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who is also the Speaker of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The Ministry of Sharia and the Foundations is controlled by Mustafa Fehmi Gerçeker. The Minister of Justice is Celalettin Arif. The Minister of the General Staff is İsmet İnönü Pasha. The Minister of Defense is Fevzi Çakmak Pasha. The Minister of Interior is initially Jami Baykurt, then followed by Hakkı Behiç Bayiç, then by Nazim Rezmor, and finally at some point by Refet Bele. Minister of Foreign Affairs is Bekir Sami Kunduh. The Minister of Economy is Yusuf Kemal Tengir Sheikh. The Minister of Finance is Hakkı Behiç Bayiç, and followed by Ahmet Ferik Tek. The Minister of Education is Riza Nur, followed by Hamdullah Subhi Tarniover. The Minister of Public Works is Ismail Fazil, followed by Omer Lutfi Argesho. The Minister of Health and Social Solidarity is Advan Adivar, the husband of Halide Adivar. On 3rd May 1920, Greek Prime Minister Efthimios Venizelos engages in the press with the demands of the united opposition for immediate elections, by making it clear that elections will only follow the resolution by treaty of the Ottoman issue. He jokes that the united opposition wants to take power in order to ruin the Greek effort in Asia Minor, so that then they can denounce the effort as doomed to fail from the start. Interestingly enough, this is one of the arguments of the anti-Venizelists in the historiography. On 5th May 1920, in reaction to the Soviet expansion in Azerbaijan and the Alexandropol Bolshevik agitation, Alexander Khatisyan is forced to step down as Prime Minister of the Armenian Democratic Republic. He is replaced by Hamazasp Okhanjanyan and a bureau government of the Danshanktuyun party. Most of Azerbaijan is now under Red Army control. We have the Second National Congress of Western Armenians that meets at Paris, but it is boycotted by many communities that prefer loyalty to the Republic. There is an increasing schism between Bogos Nur Bur and the Western Armenian, that is the Ottoman Armenian organizations, and those who are loyal to the existing Erevan Republic. 6 May 1920, Armenia declares a state of emergency. In Ankara, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk blocks Karabakh's plan for a campaign in Armenia in the spring of 1920. There is a revolt at Konya Iconium, which is quickly suppressed. In Athens, Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos addresses the parliament. Earlier, an attempt at a signal of reconciliation led by Prince Nicholas was blocked by Ioannis Metaxas. In his speech, he laid out the measures of clemency and erasing of political restrictions his government was willing to take once the peace treaty clauses with the Ottoman Empire were announced. He made it clear that not all repressive measures will be lifted, and he blamed the continued activity of the exiled court as the reason for that. His measures included the granting of amnesty for several categories of people prosecuted in the period 27 June 1917 to 23 April 1920. It included a general amnesty for any crimes committed by Muslim citizens of the Greek state in the regions under Bulgarian occupation during World War I. He openly justifies this specific policy on the ground that it's needed to win over the Muslim population of Greece, the Muslim population of Greece, whether current or future, to the Greek national project. It included the lifting of the statute of limitations for crimes committed between 1916 and 1917, and this did not include the crimes for which members of the Constantinist governments of 1916-1917 were under trial for, including ex-prime ministers Gounaris and Skouloudis. The general amnesty did not cover the case of 5 or 6 trial dodgers that had yet to surrender themselves to the state. He raises the state of siege, with the exception of preventive censorship of any criticism of the government's military policy or the decision to pursue Greek interests in Asia Minor via war. He also noted the preparation of law that would prohibit the deportation of suspects. He then went over the results of his use of the military law in order to attack the accusation of the opposition that he was a tyrant. He noted that there were 207 political prisoners, of which 33 were held for high treason. Of the 174 others, 24 were Muslims, potentially including persons arrested in Izmir, and mostly covered by the amnesty provisions. Of the 150 remaining, 76 will be amnestied with the new decisions. Of the 43 remaining, all held for mutiny, 41 were held for the November 1916 events and cannot be amnestied or shown clemency yet. Beyond the 207 political prisoners, there were also 2,880 people held awaiting trial for political crimes. Of those two, only 184 were in prison. The rest are going to be covered by the general amnesty provisions. Of the 184 held in prison, 95 were Muslims from Smyrna, Izmir, whose disposition will have to wait the peace treaty. 43 are officers of the 4th Corps, held in custody for surrendering their unit to the Germans in World War I. Of the remaining 38 38 will be amnestied and 5 were held on charges of mutiny. He then discusses the more serious issue of the civil servants and military staff that was fired as part of the regime change of 1917. From the foreign ministry, the fired were 18, of which 4 were fired for incompetence. 1 was found guilty of embezzlement. 1 was called back to serve but refused by saying that he did not recognize the post-1917 regime. The remaining 12 have the right to ask to be reinstated, and the government will be willing to see those applications in a positive light. From the Ministry of Education, 15 members of the theater service were fired, of which 7 were rehired, leaving 8 outside of the service. Of high school teachers, 185 were fired, of which 144 were rehired, leaving outside the service 41. 5 were fired in the archaeological service, of which 1 was rehired. Of elementary school teachers that were fired, most were rehired, barring 60 to 70, of which 20 to 25 had retired or found other jobs, while 50 cannot be rehired as they demand to be rehired for the exact post they held before being fired. 6 general inspectors of education were fired, of which 1 was rehired. Another 5 were fired for administrative crimes. From the Ministry of Interior, 30 were fired, of which 15 were rehired. In the Ministry of Finance, 240 were fired, of which 126 were rehired. In the Ministry of National Economy, 14 were fired, of which 3 were rehired in different services. In the Justice Ministry, 305 were fired, of which 139 were rehired. In the Ministry of Transportation, 63 were fired, of which 39 were rehired. In the Ministry of Agriculture, 40 were fired, of which 15 were rehired. Thus, in a total, about 500 civil servants that were fired were still not in service. He then discussed the thornier issue of discharged officers. Let me explain why. The discharging of military officers changes the promotion list of the Greek army, permitting Venizelist officers to reach ranks faster than if no discharges had taken place. Restoring discharged officers opened up the thorny issue of seniority and the changes that should be brought to the promotion list. Understandably, the officers of the national defense had no intention to accept being outranked by people they saw as traitors. Venizelos is clear that there can be no discussion of restoring discharged officers as it would lead to the explosion in the army. Here we have a clear statement of the limits of Venizelos' power in Greece. He did not rule the army, but ruled with the army, essentially the national defense veterans of 1916-1917. This will become much more pronounced in future Greek politics. Now, Venizelos said that he will arrange for the discharged officers to get their retirement under the new law, and those of the 4th Corps held in prison who would like to individually plead their cases will be given a hearing. Furthermore, he discussed the possibility of inducting them into the civil service, especially as civil engineers and cartographers or in the geographic service. Both will be in high demand due to the expansion of Greece in Asia Minor. He then once more went over his version of 1914-1918 events, attacking his opponents. He then announced that after the peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire, there will be new legislative elections. He noted that he will not wait for the integration of the new territories granted to Greece by the peace treaty, but would rely on his confidence of winning the election in the 1913 territories. On 7th May 1920, Georgia and the Soviet Bolshevik regime make a treaty. Under it, de jure, the Russian Socialist Federated Soviet Republics de jure recognizes Georgia. The Communist Party of Georgia, in turn, is legalized by the Menshevik government. Between 6 and 14 May 1920, Dro rejects Sultanov's attempt to use the Soviet-changed government in order to divide the Armenians in Karabakh. However, the approach of the Soviet army turns Armenian Bolsheviks against Dro. On 9 May 1920, Karabakh again demands permission to attack Armenia. Kemal again refuses to permit it. There is a lengthy, angry exchange between Kemal and Karabakh over the question of the timing of a war with Armenia. At a secret session of the Turkish Grand National Assembly, there is a discussion about supposed attempts by people associated with the Istanbul-Constantinople government to seek negotiations. The mediator, according to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, is Nurettin Sakali Pasha, arch-enemy of the Ottoman Greeks. Nurettin later in June joins Ankara, but has a falling out with the Turkish Grand National Assembly and goes on self-exile. Between 10 and 23 May 1920, the Bolshevik insurrection happens in Armenia. The Soviets do not support it, and the insurrection collapses. On 11th May 1920, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is tried in absentia and sentenced to death by the Ottoman government in Istanbul, Constantinople. The Ottoman delegation, headed by the Grand Vizier Damat Ferit Pasha, arrives in Paris to receive the draft treaty negotiated by the Allies. The Turkish Grand National Assembly of the Foreign Affairs Commissar Bekir Sami Bey and Commissar of Economics Yusuf Kemal Bey leave for Moscow on a mission to establish diplomatic relations and close cooperation with the Russian Socialist Federated Soviet Republics. There is a new military activity by the Circassian Ahmet Anzavur in the Adapazar region. Ryan Gingeras, a noted historian, notes how the ease of Anzavur in raising the Circassians and other Muslim elements of the broader Marmara region was tied not only to British support, which is what he is accused by the nationalists, but also to the fears of many Circassians that the Turkish Grand National Assembly was totally controlled by the Committee of Union and Progress and would inflict to them the kind of deportation and population movement policies that previous Committee of Union and Progress administrations had inflicted. It does not help that, as a Turkish military historian told me in a personal conversation, that the local nationalist forces in the Marmara region were heavily made up of ex-special organization Teşkilat-i Mahsusa men, who by many were seen as the core of the old Committee of Union and Progress. They also were fairly outside the direct control of the Turkish Grand National Assembly, Ankara. We have to understand, this is something you have to understand, is that many ex-members of the Committee of Union and Progress and even the government were part of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. This is unavoidable, as the Committee of Union and Progress was the largest mass party political movement in the Ottoman Empire in the last 20 years. And a lot of the Muslim population had already also been subjected to policies such as deportation and movement by the Committee of Union and Progress, especially Circassians and Kurds, which explains to a certain point their unwillingness to support or accept the authority of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. Now, between 11 and 26 May 1920, the Red Army occupies Karabakh. Draw, under popular pressure, falls back to Armenia without a fight. Mountainous Karabakh declares its submission to the Soviet regime at Baku. So the Armenian Revolution in the Armenian majority Karabakh region comes to an end, and the Armenians submit to the new Bolshevik regime in Azerbaijan. On 30th May 1920, there is the anemic resolution of the Hardin Subcommittee in support of Armenia passed by the US Senate. In Athens, Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos again addresses Parliament, this time discussing the decisions of the San Remo Conference. He announced that under the terms given to the Turkish representatives, Greece gains access to the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara through the incorporation of all of Western Thrace and most of Eastern Thrace, including the Gallipoli Hellespont Peninsula. Bulgaria is given commercial transit rights through Dedeagats, Alexandroupolis. A 15-kilometer wide zone along the Marmara coast is declared demilitarized for Greece, but as he points out, the same happens on the part that remains to Turkey and at a bigger depth that sometimes comes close to 100 kilometers. He argues that unlike in 1913, expansion now does not raise military threats because Greece now is stronger than its potential enemies Bulgaria and Turkey. In 1913, Venizelos had opposed an attempt to incorporate Thrace to Greece because he said that it will not be possible to defend it from a Bulgarian threat. Now he believes Greece is strong enough to be able to do this expansion. Greece will get Imbros and Tenedos, Gogecheada and Bokazada, and Turkey will give up all rights to the Eastern Aegean Islands granted to Greece by the Ambassadors' Conference of London. This is a big deal for Venizelos because you have to remember between 1914 and 1915, his biggest fear was a new war with the Ottoman Empire because the Committee of Union and Progress refused to recognize the reality on the ground that the Greek-populated majority Greek islands were now under Greek rule. So having the Ottoman Empire finally recognize de jure the reality on the ground was a big deal for Venizelos. He notes that Italy gets the Deccanese, but notes that there will be a treaty between Greece and Italy when the Turkish treaty is signed that will grant Greece all the Deccanese except from Rhodes. Rhodes will be granted to Greece when the UK grants to Greece Cyprus. On the other hand, Castellorizo is forever lost to Greece, as he points out. In Asia Minor, Smyrna, Izmir, and its hinterland are granted to Greek administration and military occupation, so the region remains under Ottoman suzerainty. The Ottoman government grants all of its administrative powers to the Greek state, including coinage. So actually, during the occupation period or liberation period, depending on your nationalism, Greece was actually minting Ottoman coins in Izmir, Smyrna. The terms legitimate the presence of the Greek High Commissioner's office, the expansion of the Greek civil service to the region, and the presence of the Greek army in the region. There will be a local elected assembly with an electoral system that provides proportional representation for all religious, ethnic, and linguistic groups. Once the treaty is ratified, Greece must present within 6 months to the League of Nations the electoral law for coordination. The Greek state has the right to delay a vote for up to a year in order to give time for the refugees and deportees of the 1914-1918 period to return to their homes. There will be a customs union between the Smyrna-Izmir region and the Greek state. The Turkish state is granted a free trade zone within the port of Izmir-Smyrna. All Ottoman citizens that have no other citizenship are to be emulated to Greek citizenship, with Greece taking on consular protection for them. For financial reasons, the region of Smyrna-Izmir is considered similar to territory lost to the Ottoman Empire by the treaty. Greece will take a share of the Ottoman debt, and 5 years after the ratification of the treaty, the local assembly may, by majority vote, ask the League of Nations for Smyrna-Izmir to become part of Greece. Turkey gives up all rights and titles if the League of Nations accepts to hold a referendum and this supports annexation to Greece. Venizelos argues that these terms are excellent and will make it smooth for the incorporation of Izmir-Smyrna to Greece by 1925. He also makes a special mention about High Commissioner Aristides Steriadis, thanking him for his service and ascribing to him the successes of the Greek claim of their ability to rule over non-Greek populations. This is also essentially him firing warning shots to his own party about any continued opposition to Styriadis. He then discusses the Straits Commission and stresses that unlike the Turkish part of the Straits, in the Greek part of the Straits, any crimes committed according to the law made by the committee will be prosecuted in the Greek courts rather than the consular courts of the capitulation regime. He then discusses the fate of the Turkish state left over from the losses of sovereignty to Greece and the Straits Commission. He notes the loss of Sicilia, Adana region, Syria, Mesopotamia, Palestine, Arabia, Egypt, and Armenia. For the final borders of the Armenia cession will be decided by arbitration by President Wilson. He does note that he hopes that Wilson will not grant Armenia, any part of the Trabzon Vilayet, instead giving it commercial transit rights to the city of Trabzon. He then discusses the issue of Pontic Greeks. He noted his initial support for a confederation of Armenia and those parts of Pontus that were not part of the Trabzon Vilayet under a common major power mandate, but notes that this was opposed by the Pontic Greeks themselves and the other local populations. He would still be supporting incorporation of the Trabzon Vilayet into an Armenian state, but again noted that Pontic Greeks opposed such a schema. He in the end notes that all involved sides were opposed to any division of the Trabzon Vilayet among different states. He notes how the terms create local autonomy for Kurdistan, which within a year of its establishment may ask for independence from the League of Nations, with Turkey giving up all rights for interference. He then concludes that what will be left of the Ottoman Empire will be a region whose population in no way will be more than that of the Greek state, estimating its post-war population at 9 million, of which only 7 million will be Muslims. He is, to be clear, he is grossly underestimating the Muslim population, which is probably will have been closer to 12 million. Especially as no one would expect that most Muslims will remain under Armenian or Greek rule. Turkey ceases to be a European power, despite holding on to Istanbul Constantinople, as it cannot project power anymore into Europe. He importantly notes that the Ottoman hold on Istanbul Constantinople is contingent on the Turkish government not violating the treaty terms, especially for minority protection. But Venizelos notes that the real guarantee of minority rights is the presence of the Greek army within striking distance of Istanbul Constantinople. He then notes that Turkey ceases to have an army beyond a gendarmerie of 35,000 men, a force he considers adequate for the control of the territory and population of the current Turkey. The gendarmerie will be created by a committee of foreign officers and have 15% of its number made up of foreigners and recruited locally proportional to the local populations. Furthermore, the gendarmerie will be divided into districts, and movement of forces from one district to the other will be prohibited without the permission of the International Committee. The same rules apply to the city police, rural police, and forest guard. The gendarmerie will be supported by a 15,000-strong auxiliary force, again under the control of the International Committee, again divided into districts without permission of a union of forces, without consent of the International Committee, and will be permitted only pack artillery and machine guns. The rammed Turkish state is prohibited an air force and a navy beyond Coast Guard ships up to 600 tons. He then discusses the minority protection regime, which he considers the best formulated part of the draft treaty. This includes educational autonomy for the minorities and confirmation of all privileges given to minorities by prior state actions. All state acts that interfere with all previously granted minority privileges are annulled. Minorities have exactly the same rights as Muslims, together with full freedom of creating, administration of educational, communal, and religious institutions. The Turkish state loses all supervision rights over this. He notes the importance of the annulment of all decisions based on the 1915 property law as a way to force the Ottoman government to restore deportees and refugees. He also notes that Turkey is required to enter into negotiations for fostering mutual population movements, but it cannot do so on the basis of the non-voluntary Greek-Bulgarian population exchange agreement. Turkey is required to have proportional representation of nationalities in all elected bodies. Turkey must recognize all foreign university degrees and permit their holders to freely work in its territory. The Ottoman government is required to give up to the Entente powers any citizen accused by them of having committed war crimes to be put on trial by military tribunals. This includes all accused of perpetrating the massacres committed during the war. He calls them massacres, just to be clear. Turkey is required to compensate all damages done to Entente citizens during the war and until the implementation of this treaty. Capitulations are restored and extended to all Entente allies. Venizelos does not consider this a good thing. as he is against the capitulation regime, and notes that fortunately the restoration is temporary. The draft treaty requires the creation of a special committee of the major powers that will create a new judicial system for the Ottoman Empire that will replace all existing capitulatory regimes. He finishes his speech by declaring that Greece has no territorial claims beyond its northern borders, and that once the treaty with Turkey is signed, Greece and the Liberal Party have no claims against Turkey. Between 15th May and until 27th August 1920, we have the first Yozgat insurrection against the Turkish Grand National Assembly. This ends up collecting disparate elements opposed to the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The insurrection is of strategic importance, since loss of control of Yozgat cuts off the direct metal road link between Ankara and Sivas-Sevastia. On 17 May 1920, President Wilson accepts the invitation to arbitrate the Turkish-Armenian border. Between 20th May and 7th July 1920, the Cemil Ceto Kurdish mutiny against the Turkish Grand National Assembly takes place. Meanwhile, Karakom is dissolved by the Bolsheviks. Karakom was a committee created to support the Bolshevization of the Caucasian area. Ağam Zavur is defeated for a third time by the Turkish Grand National Assembly forces at Geydeh. Between 25 May and 21st July 1920, we have the Zile insurrection against the Turkish Grand National Assembly, again in the Yozgat area. Between 26th and 31st May 1920, we have the failed anti-Soviet Ganja insurrection in Soviet Azerbaijan. On 27th May 1920, the UK War Office blocks the purchase of surplus airplanes by Armenia. We have the Yeni Khan insurrection led by Nazim the Postman and Kara Mustafa the Circassian in Yeni Khan. And Greek troops begin taking control of Thrace up to the Maritsa-Meriç-Evros River. On 29th May 1920, we have a 20-day truce between the French and the Turkish Grand National Assembly at Sicilia, Adana. On 31st May 1920, in Greece, the Prime Minister again addresses the Parliament. In the speech, he requested again the reimposition of military law, which he had lifted just a couple of days ago. He justifies the claim of the need for new military law by pointing out how its lifting immediately led to demands by the opposition press for the restoration of exiled King Constantine. He also noted how he wanted the next parliament to make a special plaque in the assembly hall declaring that King Constantine, dissolving unconstitutionally the parliament, lost his throne while the parliament met again. Venizelos is not one to forget and forgive. He then states that he will not call for the next parliament to be a constitutional one, essentially constitutional amendment one, since it will create issues that will interfere with the integration of the Greek new dominions. He makes it clear that his government will never permit the issue of the restoration of Constantine to be put on the agenda. Then he goes into a very nasty and heavy attack against the opposition. He is clear that the signing of the treaty will not just end the war for Greece. He is clear, that the signing of the treaty will not end the war for Greece, which will have to fight to impose it on Kemal and Tayyar. He specifically uses those terms. He also is clear that the final resolution of the national schism will come after the implementation of the treaty, and he is confident that the Greek people will reject in such a way the Constantinist opposition that they will cease to be a political factor in Greece forever. On 1st June 1920, the US Senate votes against the US mandate of Armenia. This is the end of the discussions for a foreign mandate over the Armenian Republic. Between 1st June and 8th September 1920, we have the Kurdish Mardin insurrection against the Turkish Grand National Assembly. On 3 June 1920, with the beginning of the diplomatic ties between the Turkish Grand National Assembly and Soviet Russia. On 4th June 1920, Kazım Karabekir Pasha again demands permission to attack Armenia. On 6 June 1920, the Council of Ministers of the Turkish Grand National Assembly has sanctioned a limited operation to take back Sarıkamış. Forces loyal to the Turkish Grand National Assembly are finally able to suppress the general insurrections in the Bolu, Düzce, Adapazarı, Izmit area. On 5th June 1920, after a month of recess, the Armenian parliament meets again and supports the bureau government and goes on recess again until August 1st. A policy of fast Armenization is implemented. Between 8th June and 18th June 1920, the French evacuate the Black Sea port of Ergili, but fully occupy Zonguldak with its mines. Between 8th and 9th June 1920, Kazım Karabakh Pasha is assigned command of the Eastern Front against the Armenian Republic by the Turkish Grand National Assembly. Mobilization orders for the 15th Corps are issued. On 10th June 1920, the SS Hornsey leaves the UK with the first British arms shipment to Armenia. This includes 440 Vickers machine guns, 25,000 Ross rifles, which people from the World War I series can tell you how terrible they are, and uniforms for 40,000 men and other material. This is the only military shipment sent by a Western Entente great power to Armenia. The Georgians confiscate 27% of everything sent as a transit fee. The weapons arrive in Armenia in July-August 1920. On 11th June 1920, the British cabinet orders the transfer of Batum, then occupied by Britain, to Georgia. Between 11th and 27th June 1920, the Armenian army attacks the Soviet-supported rebels around Yerevan. This is the last spasm of the May Bolshevik revolt. On 14th June 1920, disparate forces opposed to the Turkish Grand National Assembly occupy Yozgat, while the Chopanoglu family also raise in revolt, severing the line of communications between Ankara and Sevastia. Kirkasian Ethem and Ibrahim Bey are ordered from Eskişehir and Bolu to go to the Yozgat area and suppress the rebellion. On 15th June 1920, Nitti resigns as Italian Prime Minister and is replaced by Giovanni Giolitti. On 18th June 1920, Ali Fuad Pasha is made commander of the Western Front, tasked with resisting the Greek forces. On 19th June 1920, the Kurdish Mili tribe, living on the borderlands between Mesopotamia and Anatolia, rebel and are forced into the French-Syrian zone. Their leaders are named by Mustafa Kemal Pasha as Mahmud Bey, Ismail Bey, Khalil Bey, Bakhur Bey, and Abdurrahman. Between 19th and 23 June 1920, the Armenian government successfully engages in combat with Turkish-supported Zangi Bashar insurgents and Kurdish-Turkish forces at Otli. On 19th June to 2 October 1920, an independence loan campaign is launched by the Armenian government. The diaspora also launches the so-called Gold Fund. On 20th June 1920, there is a major military skirmish between Greek and Italian forces at the Meander Menderes River at the level of companies. Mustafa Kemal Pasha accepts the Soviet offer of mediation with Armenia and orders Kazım Karabakh via Ismet Izmonu to postpone the planned June 23 operation to Sarıkamış. In reaction to attacks at the Izmit Nicomedia by forces loyal to the Turkish Grand National Assembly on British forces present there, Lloyd George and French Prime Minister Mitterrand decide to permit Greece to occupy Eastern Thrace and to advance against Pandirma Panormo. This operation will be overseen by the Entente military representatives. Greek forces available for the operations are Army Corps A with the 1st, 2nd Division in the Meander Menderes Valley and Kaister Küçük Menderes River valleys, Army Corps Smyrna with the Archipelagos, Smyrna and 30th Division at the Hermus Gediz and Kaikus Bakir Chai River valleys. The Kidonai Division and Cavalry Brigade were under direct Army HQ control as reserves, in addition to several rear area security battalions. This includes a total of 52 infantry battalions, 14 cavalry companies, 72 field artillery guns, 96 pack artillery guns, and 36 heavy artillery guns, for a total of about 100,000 men. The Greek command claimed to be facing about 20,000 to 30,000 forces loyal to the Turkish Grand National Assembly, including the demobilized 61st, 56th, 23rd divisions, each about 2,000 to 3,000 men, versus a Greek division of 9,000 to 12,000 men, plus Kuvayi military forces of variable quality. The initial plans called for Army Corps A to operate towards Alaşehir, Philadelphia, supported by Smyrna Army Corps advancing on Aksarion. The goal was to secure the southern flank first from Kuvayi military forces in Nazilli. Once Alaşehir, Philadelphia was occupied, then the bulk of the Greek army, Army Corps A plus Smyrna Division and 13th Division, will advance first to Balıkesir and then to Panormos Bandirman. Between 21st June and 10th July 1920, we have the Chivril incident against the Turkish Grand National Assembly. Chopur Masa attacks Chivril with deserters from the Turkish Grand National Assembly forces at Afyon. He is defeated and flees to the Greek lines. The Greek war plan is changed. It was decided that Panormos Bandrima would be taken by a naval landing made up from Thrace by a special detachment of the Xanthi, later known as the 12th Division, and the 27th Infantry Regiment of the Smyrna Division since May in Thessaloniki. 22 June 1920, the Greek summer offensive begins. The 30th Division advances to Alashe, Philadelphia, while the rest of the army coups Smyrna, plus part of the 30th Division moved to Aksarium, Aksaray, and Soma. On 23rd June 1920, 1,200 Yozgat rebels, emboldened by the fall of the fort of Zile, attack Boghjaslajan. The 5th Kafkasian Division, Commander Jemal Javid Bey, the Kuvayi military forces of Kilich Ali Bey from Antep, and the forces of Kirkasian Athem and forces from Erzurum converged on Yozgat to defeat the rebellion. At the Izmit Komedia region, the Turkophone Greek Orthodox town of Fulachil Folitsa is burned to the ground by Muslim military bands, which the local Greeks and Istanbul Constantinople government accuse of working for the Turkish Grand National Assembly. Haji Mehmet, called a gendarmerie officer of Karamusal, and a Jemal Dagestanli Jemal Bey were accused as the leading perpetrators. There were 182 named victims. The local Turkophone Greeks left a poem on this. Kemalin adamları harmanlardan indiler, sale günü fulaciyi baştilar. Güzel karıları ayrı koyuntular ve çıplak oynatırlar. Çocuklarımızı olmadan mezara koyundular. Erkekleri kilisenin içinde yaktılar. Papazın ağzına gemileri geçirdiler. Yetiş Yunanistan'ım, yetiş yardım kimsenden yoktur. The destruction of Fulagic Folicia followed the earlier attacks on the Greek community of Ortaköy, close to Gave, on 3rd April 1920, which local Greeks and the Istanbul Constantinople government laid at the hands of forces loyal to the Turkish Grand National Assembly, commanded by one Gavur Ali. These two incidents are part of a larger pattern of violence against the Greeks, Armenians, and other non-Muslims of the region where the Anzavur and Duzce insurrection happened. There are no denials that these things took place, but the Turkish Grand National Assembly accused bandit groups or even Istanbul Constantinople government provocateurs of being behind the attacks. For the Greeks, this is part of the Anatolian Greek genocide. Whatever the cause, many Ottoman Greeks of the region began joining guerrilla and bandit groups, which, with the arrival of the Greek army later on, will begin killing and prosecuting in conjunction with Armenian, Pomak, and Circassian groups, the Muslim population that was loyal to the Turkish Grand National Assembly in the area. On 24th June 1920, the first diplomatic contact between the Turkish Grand National Assembly and the Armenian Republic in the form of a protest by Foreign Affairs Commissar Bekir Sami Bey over the operations takes place. The Greek divisions have largely overwhelmed the Kuvayi military forces and occupied the line Alaşehir, Philadelphia, Soma, Elisher, Ahmetli. The Greeks claim to have inflicted 686 casualties and captured 808 prisoners. Ali Fuad Pasha decides to save the precious regular divisions and adhems forces and orders them all back to the line Uşak, Şaraköy, Bursa. On 25 June 1920, Ottoman government observations on the draft treaty are submitted. British forces land and occupy Mudanya. On 26 June 1920, the Greek army is reorganized into two ad hoc groups of division. The North Group of Divisions under direct command of Lieutenant General Leonidas Paraskevopoulos, Commander-in-Chief of the Greek Army, comprised of the Archipelagos, Smyrna, and 13th Division, plus the Cavalry Brigade and 9th Field Artillery Regiment. The objective of this force was capturing Bandrima, Panormos, and then Bursa, Prusa. The last objective was agreed with the local British commanders and not announced to Greek Prime Minister Eleftheris Venizelos. Venizelos did not know that Bursa was to be occupied. This will make him very angry later. The other group was Army Corps Smyrna, now left with the hollowed-out Kriti and Kydonia divisions, which will be united on the way to make one division. Between 27th and 28th June 1920, we have the Kula incident against the Turkish Grand National Assembly. On 20th June 1920, UK and Georgia signed two agreements by which Batum was turned over to Georgia. On 29th June 1920, the North Group of Divisions of the Greek Army attacks and captures by the 30th of June Balikeshir, Mechehora, and Koseler, and the Tashinar Heights. Some Kuvayi military forces were dispersed by the 542 Evzon Regiment and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. On 30 June 1920, the Politburo prohibits any further advance of the Red Army into Armenia. Lieutenant General Leonidas Paraskevopoulos sends a telegram to Eleftherios Venizelos asking Venizelos to permit him to focus the Greek military effort on capturing Afyon Karahisar and Eskişehir as quickly as possible. At this point of time, a Greek advance to Afyon Karahisar and the Eskişehir line could not be stopped. There was simply not enough in Kuvayi Milli and regular Turkish forces, and would have put the Greek army on a good position for launching operations against Iconium, Konya, and Ankara as early as March 1921. However, on 6 July 1920, Venizelos orders Paraskevopoulos to reorient Greek forces for an operation for occupying eastern Thrace as quickly as possible, as he expects it to be given to Greece with the peace treaty and his word of a potential Bulgarian-Turkish cooperation there. This is the most monumental decision in the Asia Minor campaign to date, as it meant that Eskişehir and Afyon Karahisar could not be occupied in the summer 1920 campaign season, giving the forces of the Turkish Grand National Assembly a 6-month break from Greek pressure. And this is where we stop. My sources include Andrew Mango, Ataturk, Gazi Mustafa Pasha, Kemal Ataturk, The Great Speech, the concise history of the campaign in Asia Minor by the Greek General Staff, the Turkish General Staff volumes on the operations between the creation of the Turkish Grand National Assembly and the Greek Summer Offensive, plus the book that specializes on the internal revolutions, Φουλατζίκ, ένα δίστομο στη Βυθινία τον Ιούνιο του 1920 from the block of Vlases Agzidis. And about this, and there's some others I'm forgetting, obviously, τα κείμενα του Ελευθέρου Βενιζέλου, documents of Eleftherios Venizelos. So, that's where I'm leaving you with this. As everybody knows, July and August 1920 are monumental events taking place in Asia Minor and within this war. So there will be an episode about this. Keep up the good work, stay safe. The pandemic is not over. If you have the option of not working or having to go to work somewhere, take care of yourself, wear your masks. See you all in August or September, where I hope to upload an episode. Thank you all for watching this show, and I'll keep up with it, okay? Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Yak Shamlar. Good evening.